Okay, so today I will continue the lecture on the quantum non-demolition measurement of the photon number in the cavity. And in the last lecture, I considered the simplest situation of gathering binary information about the quantum state of the field, which was limited to 0 or 1 photon. So it was a very simple situation. And my goal today is to show that we can make more general quantum non-demolition measurement and achieve indeed also ideal projective measurement, not only for 0 or 1 photon, but for larger photon number. And for this, we'll have to develop a little bit more sophisticated formalism compared to what I discussed yesterday, which was basically based on intuitive correlations between the field stored in the cavity and the atomic state after interaction. So for measuring a larger photon number, I will need to gather more information than the single atom information, because obviously 1 bit of information is not enough to encode a photon number larger than 1. So that's the goal, to show how it works to make a more general measurement of the field, which have many degrees of freedom. And it's interesting to take advantage of all the many degrees of freedom of the field in this experiment for measurement, but also for going to the Schrödinger cat preparation and decoherence part of my lecture. So just before going to the more complicated case, I would like first to remind you about the principle of the experiment, which is basically an atomic clock experiment in which the atomic state, which is initially prepared in E, is submitted to 2 consecutive pi/2 pulses originating from a classical microwave source. And I would like to give a kind of symbolic scheme of the Ramsey setup, but presenting it such a way that it looks like a 2-wave interferometer. So here is the trajectory of the atom submitted to the 2 pi/2 pulses. Which are generated by the interaction with a classical source with a frequency close to resonance with respect to atomic frequency. And I had here an element, a phase shifter, which allows eventually to adjust the relative phase between these 2 pi/2 pulses. So now let me depict the history which happened to the atom, a kind of symbolic line. So this line represents the atom in the upper state, E. And then when we apply the first pi/2 pulse, a photon can be eventually emitted by stimulated emission, stimulated by the classical field, so that the atom makes a transition to the state J. And then the evolution can eventually follow this line representing the state J. Then the atoms will travel across the cavity, but just forget about the cavity first. The atoms are submitted to this second pi/2 pulse, where again the atom, if in the path corresponding to E, so this I forgot to mention that this representation of the pi/2 pulse resembles to a beam splitter in a usual optical interferometer. It splits the atomic state vector into 2 components, one in E, one in G. So the second pi/2 pulse makes the same both for E and G. So E is again splitted in E and G. G is splitted in E and G with some relative phase in the superposition, so that you have 2 ways to finally detect the atom either in E or in G, which corresponds either to the straight way. So let me use a color for the path starting in E and in E. But you can also have a path where the atom emits a photon by stimulated emission here, then flies through the cavity, then reabsorbs another photon in the second Ramsey zone, and then ends up in E. And indeed, the Ramsey fringes, which are typical of atomic clocks, result from the interference between these 2 quantum paths represented there. So if now I add the effect of a phase shift between concerning the relative phase of the 2 pi/2 pulse, what occurs is that the probability of detecting the atom in G as a function of this phase is ideally just a sign function. And indeed, this is this corresponds to what is usually called Ramsey fringes in an atomic clock experiment. And then in a clock, you set the interferometer on some fringes, and you make some lock-in of a classical oscillator to the atomic signal in order to get a clock which is very stable over time. So now, in our case, we consider the effect of a cavity in between the two Ramsey zones, which amounts to add some phase shifter in the interferometer by producing light shift. So symbolically, I will represent the light shift by the fact that the energy level E and G repel each other, so they are a little bit shifted. And the phase shift accumulated by the atomic wave function between these two paths correspond to the integral of the energy shift. So you see that there is light shift. One expects a shift of the fringes in the interferometer. And I was interested yesterday in a situation where a single photon is enough to produce a phase shift of the fringe of magnitude pi. So to put the fringes just out of phase with respect to what they were when the cavity contains just vacuum. And then, implicitly, we set yesterday the phase of the interferometer, so I would need another color eventually, so that when the cavity is in vacuum, here, you are sure that you get the atom detected in G. So it means that we are sitting at the top of a Ramsey fringes, and we choose properly the phase of the Ramsey interferometer so that we sit at the top of a fringe if the cavity is in vacuum. So here it means that at that point, the conditional probability to detect the atom in G, knowing that the field is in vacuum, is unity. And on the other hand, here, the probability to have the atom in G, knowing that the field contains one photon, is equal to 0. And then what I would stress is that the intuitive conclusion from this probability that now, if I detect the atom in G, I can deduce the fact that the field contains exactly 0 photon can be formalized mathematically by using the Bayes law linking conditional probabilities. And so I will write it because I will write it again for the more complicated case. And as I think that Bayes' law is never very intuitive, it's better to write it first in a simple case. So what is interesting in order to describe the knowledge acquired during the detection of a single atom consists in finding the new probability of photon number distribution. So I will name it P after means after a measurement. So here I consider a single atom detection of the photon number. It equals the probability of having n photons before measurement times what? Times a conditional probability. So which conditional probability should I put there? So this probability after is nothing else than a conditional probability P of n, knowing that the result, measurement result, was, for example, G. And then if you use the Bayes law, you can link, the Bayes law typically links symmetric conditional probabilities. So here, I have to put the probability of having G, knowing that there are n photons in the cavity. And then you have to put here a normalization factor, which is in practice the probability to detect G for a given value of photon number probability. So this is the law to apply if G is detected. And here this is the Bayes law, which says that PG times this conditional probability equals Pn times the opposite conditional probability. And now just put the value of these probabilities I have here. You see that this is unit which means that the probability, this is unit for n equals 0, and this is 0 for n equal 1. So applying mathematically this tells you that the new photon number probability remains 1, is 1 for 0 photons, whereas it goes to 0 for n equal 1. So from this applied to the photon number, P after, we deduce that P after of 0 is basically 1 if J is detected, and P after of 1, probability to have 1 photon knowing one atom is detected in G, is now 0. Whatever it was before, because now it is multiplied by 0, except if initially Pg was 0, P0 was 0, of course, if the initial probability to have 0 photon is 0, you never make it 1. But it means that you never detect J, if it's if the probability of having 0 is 0. So you see that the correlations here are direct consequence of the Bayes law. So it seems like silly to apply it to this, but the mathematical way to formulate how your knowledge of the photon number is affected by a detection is to apply Bayes law, because basically you have to calculate the conditional probability to have n photon knowing the result of the measurement. And this is given by that, and the ingredient to calculate the new photon number distribution is to know the conditional probability, the reverse one, which is the probability to have the detected event, G, knowing the photon number in the cavity. So this gives the general rule to apply to formally describe the acquisition of information in this process. Of course, for binary information, you can directly use intuitive correlations. But then, if contrast is not unity, if you have many photon numbers which are possible, it's very important to use this formalized version of the intuition. So using this yesterday, we managed to explain this signal in terms of quantum jumps of a field containing 0 or 1 photon. And now I will go to the generalization to the photon counting of larger photon numbers. So indeed, the experiment is the same, but the analysis will be a little bit more tricky. So let's again follow each step, because it's the same with a slight modification. So the first step of the clock, it's always an atomic clock experiment, it remains unchanged. We apply pi/2 pulse to the atom to prepare a coherent superposition of E and G, whose phase is fixed by the phase of the source S. So let's assume that the phase is such that in the frame, in the Bloch sphere picture representing this two-level system, the spin is again aligned after this rotation along the y-axis. Then follows the free evolution of the spin, which precesses at a frequency which is the atomic frequency. And we go to the rotating frame at atomic frequency so that the spin does not precesses anymore and remain fixed in the y direction until the atom crosses the cavity, where there is a mismatch between the rotating frame of the free atom, oscillating at this frequency, and the atomic frame, which oscillates a little bit faster due to light shift, to assay stark shift induced by the photon number in the cavity. So let's look at this evolution. And here we'll show up the difference with respect to the previous case. Now we adjust the interaction to be weaker by increasing the atom cavity detuning, so that the phase shift is used by a single photon is not anymore a pi phase shift per photon, but only pi/4, so a smaller phase shift. And you see that the interest is that when you reduce the single photon phase shift, you can get much more individual distinguishable possible direction for the atomic peak state. If I was just keeping the phase shift per photon to pi, indeed, all odd photon number would have been correlated to the spin pointing in the plus direction, just like vacuum, and all even photon number would have corresponded to spin corresponding to the minus y direction. So it means that with a pi phase shift per photon, what we measure is one bit of information which is precisely the parity of the photon number, because the average value of the spin will be proportional to the parity. So the parity is one information, but if you measure again and again the parity, you never know, you never distinguish between, for example, 0 and 2 photons. You always measure the same observable, you accumulate the same information, you know the parity better and better, but you don't know more than the parity. So which means that if you want to know more and distinguish between 0, 2, 4, 6, you have to ask different questions to the system. So you have to measure a different observable. And that's the goal here of reducing the phase shift, which amounts to get correlation between the spin and photon number, which are different for every photon number from 0 to 7, then to have a chance by properly choosing the measured atomic observable to have equal sensitivity to all photon number, and in particular to be able to distinguish between 0 and 2 photons, between 2 photon number just with the same parity. So I will continue the story. Here I build correlation between photon number and direction of a spin. It does not mean that it's enough to detect one atom to get the photon number, because all these 8 states of the spin are not orthogonal. Dimension of the space of spin 1/2 is 2, so 8 states cannot be orthogonal. But anyway, there is a way to measure this in order to get the photon number. So let me finish the story. Application of the second pi/2 pulse of the interferometer, just as before. And this produces a rotation of the spin along some axis, so that it maps one of the photon number, here the direction corresponding to 1 photon in the cavity and 5 photons in the cavity, along the vertical axis, which is the energy axis in which we will perform the atomic measurement. And then we detect the atom. But here you see that we have some degree of freedom in the choice of the phase of the second pi/2 pulse by varying this phase parameter. So basically by going at a different position in the Ramsey fringes pattern. And when you move in this pattern, it amounts to rotate along different angle, and it amounts to mapping to the vertical axis different photon number, so that you can make the measurement very sensitive to distinguish between 1 and 5, or between 6 and 2, or between 7 and 3, and so on. So you see that the flexibility you have in varying the phase of the interferometer amounts to perform measurement of the spin equivalent to the atom in different bases along different axes of the Bloch sphere, which means that you have a very easy button to vary the observable you measure on the atom. And by varying the phase between 4 different phases, you will explore all the direction possible for this spin after interaction. So that's the intuitive picture. Let me now make it more precise by telling the following of the story. So I told that you have to distinguish between 8 different states, and that it's not possible to make the distinction between 8 states by detecting just a single atom, because these 8 states are not orthogonal. But of course, you can resume the measurement, eventually with a different measurement direction. And the point is that when you repeat the same measurement, let us forget in the first step about the second pi/2 pulse. So just consider the correlated state of the spin on the equator of the Bloch sphere with respect to the photon number. So let us now consider not a single atom, but a collection of identical atoms crossing the cavity, and let us assume, just for the sake of simplicity, that we don't yet detect the atoms, that we don't yet apply the second pi/2 pulse. Then you build a new state of the atom cavity system involving the photon number here of the cavity, and in that, at that place shows up the atomic state. Here it's written for one atom, in the general case where the initial state of the field is a superposition state, sum over n, Cn times n. And you see that a single atom gets entangled with the field. So now what happens if I send n atoms instead of 1, well, all the atoms interact with the same field. I assume here that dissipation is negligible, so that the photon number cannot jump between the consecutive atoms. So I consider a sample of atom which is in a short time window. So then all atoms explore the same field, and the new state becomes a state where basically all the atoms will be bring in the same state if the photon number is the same. And then what you get is an entanglement between a small sample of atoms, and all of them are in the same spin state, which is correlated with the photon number n. And then, if the cavity does not contain just n photons, but a superposition states of all the possible photon number, then linearity of quantum mechanics tells you that you have such a superposition state. I'm sorry, the coefficient Cn here should also be present there on the slide. And now you see that you have information about the photon number encoded not in a single atom, but a kind of mesoscopic sample of atoms. Let's figure out that n will be of the order of like 100 atoms. So the cavity damping time is long enough so that we can have kind of 100 atoms entangled with the field before the photon number changes. And then, if you have n identical states, you can easily check that if you make the scalar product of two of these n atom states corresponding to two different photon numbers, then this scalar product is nearly zero. Because if you have a single atom, it is not, but the scalar product between these two things for n equal 1 is smaller than unity, and the number smaller than unity to the power n goes to 0 kind of fast. So you see that having many atoms is a trick to make the correlation between the number of photons in the cavity and the many atom atomic state, a correlation between orthogonal atomic states, which means that at this level, in principle, if you look not at one atom, but at n atom, you can learn about the photon number. This corresponds to the fact that the Hilbert state of n spin 1/2 at this dimension 2 to the n, which means that there is a lot of room to have distinguishable states. And here we have enough room to distinguish between photon number from 0 to 7. So let's go to the next step. Indeed, and before going to the next step, it's interesting to mention that this kind of state with entanglement between photon number encoded in the state of a mesoscopic sample of atom is already a variety of Schrödinger cat state. You can consider that the sample of many atoms, of let's say 100 atoms, is already kind of mesoscopic system. And indeed, what we are interested in is the average position of the collective spin of this atom, which encodes the number of photons in the cavity. And the direction of the mesoscopic spin of this atom is here a way to encode the photon number. And this direction is kind of a macroscopic variable, because if you have enough spin, the quantum fluctuation of the direction in which the big spin points are very small in the classical limit. So let's use this Schrödinger cat state in order to get a good measurement of n. So let's go now to the next step, in which we will measure the atomic state in different bases. And indeed, what we do is kind of a tomography of the spin, of the collective atomic spin in the equatorial plane of the Bloch sphere. So if you want to do tomography of the spin state of an atom, what you have to do is to measure sigma x, sigma y, and sigma z, whose average value are enough to determine the density operator of a single atom. Here, what you do to get the average value of the spin in the equator is just that you have to measure sigma x and sigma y. You don't care about sigma z. And indeed, that's what we do when we apply pi over 2 pulse, the second pi over 2 pulse to the atom in order to rotate either the y direction to the z-axis or the x direction to the z-axis. That's amount to measuring sigma x and sigma y for the atoms. And basically, we split the sample here of n atom into two parts. On the one half of them, we measure S6. On one of them, we measure Sy. And then we get the average value of these two operators, Sy and Sx. And as we don't detect a single atom, but a sample of n atoms, the uncertainty on this measurement on average value is determined by the shot noise corresponding to n atom detection, and it scales as 1 over square root of n. So it means that if you detect large enough number of atoms, you can distinguish between the 8 different possible directions of the spin of the atomic sample. And indeed, now I will show you that that's the way it works in reality by showing you the histogram of the results of the tomography of the atomic state performed by considering samples of 100 consecutive atoms interacting with the cavity field. So basically, for what I call one measurement now is the detection of 100 atoms. From this measurement, I get average value of S6 and Sy, and then I put a dot in the S6 XY point, which is this measurement result. So for this measurement, it appears that the measurement is very close to the direction corresponding to 4 photons, which means that intuitively we would it's very tempting to say that the field contains exactly 4 photons just after this measurement. So what we do now is to resume this for many, many samples of 100 atoms, interacting with the field that we re-prepare every time in the same way in the cavity. And here is a histogram of many, many repetitions of this measurement. And here it becomes manifest that the detection of a sample of 100 atoms is really strongly correlated to the photon number in the cavity. What is directly manifest is that the average spin after interaction with the cavity points into discrete directions. And these directions are exactly the one expects for a phase shift per photon or pi over 4. So here you have the peak corresponding to vacuum in the cavity. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and even a little bit of thing at the point corresponding to 7 photons on the cavity. And the fact that you distinguish between these peaks means that you are really in the regime where the photon number change during the measurement of 100 atoms is kind of negligible. If it was not the case, for example, if half of the n equal 3 photon states were just decaying to 2 during 2 measurements, you will just wash out the oscillations between the peak and just have some kind of average measurement of a field which changes during the measurement. So the fact that you see peaks here without a very sophisticated analysis of the experiment tells you that a sample of 100 atoms is a very good, nearly classical object, a needle, the needle of a clock, pointing in a direction which indicates the photon number in the cavity. So that's, again, a kind of intuitive analysis of the experiments which tells you that, okay, measuring 100 atoms corresponding to measuring something to the field, and something is the photon number in the cavity. So indeed, you can even do more and look at consecutive samples of 100 atoms to see the evolution of the system, to follow a single quantum history which corresponds to the experiment where we inject an initial field inside the cavity, start measuring the photon number, sample of 100 atoms, and then measure again and again by adding more and more atoms, and we can make some estimation of the field state as a function of time by analyzing the direction of the spin corresponding to a sliding window of 100 atoms that we analyze as a function of time. So here is from the top a color view, a contour view of the histogram presented here. And here is the beginning of a single measurement in which the first measurement, so the result of the measurement of detection of 100 atoms, corresponds to 4 photons in the cavity. And then let's continue the story by having more and more atoms and analyzing a sliding window of 100 atoms. So you see that for some times, all measurements are confined very close to the 4 photon state, which means that repeated measurement gives the same result. The measurement is non-destructive. Of course, after some time, as the cavity is not perfect, there is a quantum jump. And you see that after some time, all measurements give the results that are close to the peak corresponding to 3 photons in the cavity, which means that at that time, one really have a cavity containing 3 photons. So the cavity remains around this state for some time. You see that the quantum jump was fast. There are not many measurement points just in between, but it takes some time to detect it because you need the time to detect something like 100 atoms to be sure of the change of the photon number. Then we continue with time, and at later time, you have the same story around 2 photons. So then you observe a quantum jump from 3 to 2, then 1 photon, and in the end, you have the spin, which is located very close to the position corresponding to vacuum. So you see that this needle constituted by a sample of 100 atoms is good enough to just let you observe quantum jumps by looking at the average direction of the spin corresponding to this sample of 100 atoms. And what I like here is that you can have an intuition of the quantum jumps, again, without making mathematical analysis. Of course, behind, if you want to make a quantitative analysis of this, you have quantum mechanics. You will apply the measurement postulate atom per atom, and you will get a formal description of this intuitive thing, and that's what I would like to present now. So let me just show you the result of this precise atom by atom analysis. From the detected atomic states, you can infer the average photon number present in the cavity at time t. And indeed, this came, here you have the time scale, corresponds to the damping of an initial state which was a quasi-classical state injected in the cavity, which was projected on the 4-photon state, and which after something like 0.4 seconds was decaying step by step from 4 photons to vacuum. So let me now describe formally the accumulation of information that occurs during this measurement process. Maybe there are some questions at that point before starting with the math. Yes?
What's the thing before N4?
This.
Yes.
So that's the island corresponding to 5 photons. So that's the peak, that's this peak here, seen from the top in color code.
Is 3.4, 3.5.
So this is 4, this is 1, this is 5.
But how can you have 5 photons if you have a 4-photon field?
Okay, so in this precise realization of the experiment, we never have 5. But the histogram presented here corresponds to many experiments in which we inject on average 2.4 photon, but this 2.4 photon is a quasi-classical state. So in some measurement you find 5, in some you find 4, in some you find 3, according to the Poisson law probability. So of course, if the first measurement result is 4, there is a very low probability to jump to 5. There is a small probability because of blackbody radiation, which may induce upwards quantum jump. But basically, this represents the fact that there is a probability that the first measurement collapses the state to this point, and even to larger photon number. But of course, in this trajectory, it's not the case. So the color thing does not correspond to a single trajectory, but is the average of every history which can occur. Okay? Other questions? Yeah? So you mean how I know that this is 0 and that I am not wrong? So indeed, I can do this experiment without photons. So I don't inject anything. I have a good approximation of 0, which is this residual very small blackbody photon. And so maybe I have the histograms there. But then there is a single peak. And then that's kind of calibration of the interferometer. I know that this peak is vacuum. And then when I inject photons, I see that this peak diminishes and the other photon number show up. So then I believe that this corresponds to various photon number. Maybe I have the vacuum here somewhere. No, it's not vacuum. Okay. So this is, indeed, this is eventually also nice. this shows that you can use the measurement to prepare a photon number. So if you make post-selection after the measurement, if you take the state of the field of the atoms just after a measurement whose result is 3 photons, you can check that the next measurement will be close to the previous one. And you see that if a measurement gives 3, you take the next independent measurement, so another sample of 100 atoms, and it gives you that it's again 3 with a high probability. Of course, between the two measurements, there is some probability of decay, so you may have some jump to 2 photons. But to have a very good conditional preparation of the state, you can also use the information that you get a posteriori by the next measurement. And if you post-select the states where the third measurement is again 3, in between it's always a very pure n equal 3 photon number, which is a way to assess the quality of the measurement. So there was other questions? Okay. Yes.
I didn't understand how you measure Sx and Sy with standard experiments.
So in the experiment, that was indeed explained on the last step of the interferometer when I close the interferometer with a pi/2 pulse. And by choosing the phase of this pi/2 pulse, I will perform a rotation around an axis which depends on the phase of the interferometer. And okay, wait, there's not it. There is a movie. Okay, so the rotation was, I don't know. So okay, so you have the phase shift, and then the second pi/2 pulse. So you can adjust the phase between the two pulses here, which is a way to determine the axis of the rotation. And the axis of the rotation, depending whether it's a line over y or x, will map x on z or y on z. And measuring z after this mapping amounts to measure either x or y.
Okay, but how do you measure both?
Okay, so for each atom, you decide to measure either one or the other. And you measure both on average over 100 atoms by measuring x over the first half and y over the other half. Indeed, we alternate randomly the measurement, but basically we have a statistical sample of atoms, 100 atoms, more or less in some quantum state, and you make the tomography of this sample by dividing it in two. On one half you measure sigma x, on the other half you measure sigma y, and if you assume that all of these atoms are described by the same density operator, you get a tomographic determination of this density operator. So in practice, it's a little bit more tricky because instead of measuring either sigma x or sigma y, you make the thing more symmetric and more insensitive to imperfection by sampling all the 8 interesting directions of the spin corresponding to 8 photon number. So we alternate not between 2 phases for the Ramsey interferometer, but 4 values to really sample equally all the 8 possible photon number. Okay?
And I also didn't understand what exactly do you do to have a pi/4 phase between n?
Okay, so it's the easy part of the experiment with respect to the 1 photon thing, because basically reducing the sensitivity of the interferometer is kind of easy. You increase the detuning between atom cavity, or you could use faster atoms, but in the experiment the velocity is kind of fixed for technical reason. So we increase the atom cavity detuning, and the assay star shift here are proportional to the square of the coupling times the photon number divided by the atom cavity detuning. You have non-resonant interaction in all this. So atomic state E and G are here, and the cavity is detuned with respect to the atom by some amount delta to ensure that there is no energy exchange between atom and cavity field. So this detuning, when you increase it, reduces the assay star shift and proportionally decreases the phase shift accumulated by the atomic state in the interferometer. Okay? So making the phase shift larger would be much more difficult because at some point you become resonant and you just exchange energy. But, okay. Other questions? Yeah? Yes. So they are prepared in the same state, but they are prepared in a product state. So in this sense, that's what I call independent atoms. Of course, once they interact with the field, they are not independent anymore because all of them get correlated with the same photon number. They see the same field. So they become correlated to the field and correlated with respect to each other. And the things worse because basically all the atoms are encoding the same information. So in the atom, you have kind of redundant information, which is a good thing to perform a good measurement. Basically, when you want to perform a measurement, and that's indeed a very good model of measurement apparatus, the recipe is to start with the quantum information, the quantum system, make it interact with the environment, and when you reach the level where you perform a classical measurement, it usually means that the information encoded in the matter is very redundant and was kind of broadcasted in the environment, and redundancy is important for this.
But they see the same as product state.
Okay, so no, it depends on the state of the cavity. So if you assume that you have a pure photon number, so not a superposition, but just one given n in the cavity, then all atoms are in the same state, but this is a product state with a cavity field. But if you have two different photon numbers, then the entanglement shows up because you have a superposition of two such states, which is not factorizable as soon as the state you have correlated to n becomes orthogonal with respect to each other, which is the case if n is large enough. So always, if you have two possible photon numbers, you get some entangled state. And indeed, in a measurement, if you remember the general picture of indirect measurement I presented at the beginning of this lecture, the first step is entanglement. And the way to encode information between two quantum systems, necessarily involves entanglement. Then you separate the system and you measure the state of the matter, which is the atom. And then as a result of entanglement, you will indirectly project the field state. Okay? Yes?
So, further in the quantum jump figure,
Yeah.
so there is a time scale, and this time scale seems quite periodic. So this periodicity says something about the vacuum?
No, it tells nothing. It tells nothing. It tells that we choose a trajectory where you clearly saw nice steps for every photon number. But again, if you do the statistics, and we did the statistical reconstruction of the evolution with many such trajectory, like 2,000 trajectory, so on average, the decay is just the expected exponential decay, and sometimes this is very short, sometimes this is very long, and these are fluctuation. But the statistics of this fluctuation can be analyzed very precisely and are exactly what we expect. And they are just due to cavity decay and not due to energy exchange with the atom. Okay? Okay, so one more questions? Yeah? But the last one, maybe we have then to continue.
I didn't understand. You neglect the measurements of n greater than 7 or
Okay, so that's a good question. We can come back at the end of this. In all this analysis, of course, if there were 8 photons, you will have a peak overlapping between 0 and 8. So here, I was careful enough to inject, on average, something like 2.5 photons, so that the probability to have 8 is kind of negligible. Of course, if I inject a larger photon number, then it may be that 0 is not 0, but is 8. So this occurs, I will show an example of this. But then if you look at the end of the story, you can a posteriori recognize a 0 which is not a 0, but which is 8, because 8 will jump and 0 will not.
and you inject a certain amount of photons by
No, that's the way I mentioned yesterday. We have some microwave source connected to a waveguide, which is used to inject photon by diffraction on the border of the mirror. So it's already a classical source which radiates a classical field. But anyway, in this experiment, only the photon number is important. The phase of the field does not matter. Okay? Okay, so let's go to the now more mathematical analysis of what occurs in this experiment, and indeed describe formally the progressive accumulation of information you get by applying the quantum mechanical recipe. So let's say the projection postulate every time you detect one atom. So I will not write the wave function, the quantum state. You can do this as exercise. I will just discuss the result of the measurement, which is depicted on that slide. So initially, I assume that you have a given photon number distribution, which is eventually hidden in the experiment, but I don't need to know a priori, but assume that this photon number distribution is P naught of n. Then I will do the experiment by varying from atom to atom the phase of the Ramsey interferometer, so this phase here. And as I just told you, answering the questions, I will alternate between 4 different values of this phase to sample equally the 4 different directions in which the spin can point. Indeed, 4 means 8 because every time you have plus in one direction, minus in the same direction corresponds to the same phase setting. Then let us consider the first measurement. So we now consider the measurement one by one. And the first measurement amounts to the measurement of the spin in the equator plane in the direction set by the phase phi r. And the result is 1 bit of information. I will represent it by a sign plus or minus for a spin around the direction of the measurement. And then what is the result of the projection of the field state as a result of a correlation between spin, single atom spin now, and photon number? Indeed, the result of the quantum calculation is the Bayes law. So exactly what I wrote here in the case of a simple field containing either 0 or 1 photon. So the recipe is that the new photon number distribution, which is conditioned by the measurement result, so this is a conditional probability of n photon conditioned by the measurement result, is the initial photon number distribution before the measurement times the opposite conditional probability. And this probability, and then there is a normalization factor so that the new distribution is normalized. And now let us look at this probability. It's intuitive to find it. The probability to have plus, let's say, the spin pointing in plus direction phi as a function of n. If you vary n here in the Ramsey interferometer, it amounts to make the fringe move. And if the fringe move as a function of n, this function is an oscillatory function of n with 0 and with maxima. And you see that if one photon number coincides with a 0, the new probability will be close to 0. And if the photon number coincides to a maximum of this function, the new photon distribution will have a peak around this value. Basically, the photon number which are more probable, knowing the measurement result, are favored by this conditional probability rule by the Bayes law. Then, once you apply this, you iterate with the next atom. So you have a new photon number distribution that you take as initial one, and you resume. And every time you sample a different direction so that the function here have a different phase, and you will get information over a different photon number. So more precisely, let us consider the mathematical consequence of this formula. So here I represented as a function of the photon number the conditional probability to have the spin pointing, so this conditional probability to get the measurement result plus along direction phi r, knowing that there are n photon number. And as I told you, when I vary the photon number, this probability comes from the variation of the phase of the fringes. So it is an oscillatory function of the photon number. So here I take oscillation with a finite contrast in order to take into account the finite contrast of the Ramsey interferometer. And here also, it's very nice that it's very easy to take into account the experimental imperfection. All the imperfections are contained in the actual conditional probability, and the contrast of the fringes is the actual contrast. The contrast of this function is the actual contrast of the Ramsey fringes. So basically, to calibrate the measurement apparatus, you just have to calibrate the amplitude of the Ramsey fringes, and then you know by which function you have to multiply the initial photon number distribution. So here I assume that I don't know the initial photon number distribution, so I assume that this full uncertainty about the photon number is represented by an initial photon number distribution which is flat, which means that I put no a priori knowledge, except the fact that I say, okay, this is flat until 7, but I know that there is no probability to have 8 in order to exclude the ambiguous case where we could have 8 photons corresponding also to 0 photon in this signal. So multiplying a flat function by a sine gives you a new photon number distribution which have a sine function. And the important point is that the 0 of this sine function basically kills the probability of some photon number. And you see that when you accumulate information, every time you detect one atom, you will favor the photon number, which makes more probable the measurement you actually got in a single measurement. Then if you vary the phase of the measurement phi, indeed, the sine function you use will move and will not have the 0 on the same n. And then you can sample a different L and either favor or cancel the probability of different L n in the measurement. Of course, this was what you obtain if you detect the atom in the upper state E, when I use the blue curve to have the new photon number distribution. If I have the other measurement result, then the 4 photon number state is the most probable one, between 0 and 7, and the new photon number distribution looks very different. And you see that the very important thing is that the modification of the photon number distribution have nothing to do with photon absorption or emission in the cavity. It's just acquisition of information. You have a system with big uncertainty on the photon number, you measure something, and then you know better the photon number distribution. And then, of course, we can accumulate now many such measurements with many different phases of the Ramsey interferometer. And the result of the accumulation of information is represented on this histogram graph, where you are on this axis the photon number, and vertically we encode the photon number probability distribution, which is initially flat, and the other axis is the number of atoms successively crossing the cavity, which basically is equivalent to time, more or less. So as a function of time, as a function of accumulation of information over 100 atom detection, you see how the photon number distribution evolves in an actual experiment. So this experiment corresponds to the preparation of some state. So I know that the state prepared was a current state indeed, but I don't put this a priori knowledge. And then measuring. And this is a single quantum measurement in one realization of the experiment. And you see very clearly that the accumulation of information improves better and better, implies better and better knowledge of the photon number distribution in the cavity, which is, in the end, with a very good approximation, a single peaked function, here peaked on the number of photon 5 in the cavity. So in this measurement, we can say from the list of measurement results and the analysis from application of Bayes' law that only one photon number remains compatible with high probability with the measurement result. And you see that this function is so peaked that basically the measurement result does not very much depend on the initial distribution, provided it does not at 0 at some photon number. Because if the initial state I put a 0 in some probability, it will always remain 0 when I multiply it by any other function. So this converges very efficiently to single photon number. And this converges every time if you repeat many different measurements. So here the initial photon number was a current field with about 3.7 photons on average. And as I illustrate, I did not need to know the initial photon number to get it. So how did I get it? So maybe you can propose a method to get the photon number distribution, the average photon number in the cavity. What would you do? I give you this measurement apparatus. How can you find the initial photon number distribution? Okay, so here I know after this one measurement that there is a chance in the initial field to have 5 photons. So if I want to know about other photon number, I will do the same experiment again. So re-prepare the same field, perform measurement, get a new result, and make the histogram of result. It means that I will be an ensemble of measurement of identical 100 atom measurement over an ensemble of identical realization of the experiment. And even if all realizations are identical with same initial state, same measurement sequence, the results are random, but the histogram of results should reconstruct the photon number distribution. So that's what we did. And here is the histogram of the result of the measurement, which is not an integer. We don't assume photon number are integer, which is here the histogram of the average photon number deduced from the inferred probability by the analysis I presented. So from this probability, what is single peak with very low noise, it's very close to an integer. Sometimes the measurement is just at the time of a quantum jumps, and you may have a little bit of probability around so that the photon number, the average photon number is not always integer. But you see that the average photon number peaks preferentially on discrete photon number. Again, it's a manifestation of discrete value of the energy of the cavity field. And then the measurements are the red bar, and the blue curve is the envelope of a Poisson distribution. So you see that the measurement result fits very well the Poisson distribution expected for a current field. And from this field, we deduce the average photon number of 3.4 photon with a very high precision indeed. So that's the way it works. Not only to get the photon number in a given realization of the experiment, but then to get the full knowledge of the photon number statistics in the cavity. So indeed, you could also remark there is, at some point, a discrepancy between the expected probability distribution and the measurement result. So where is it? So the blue curve is good everywhere except here. So who can suggest why this looks like wrong, but indeed is not? So why is there an excess probability of vacuum? Vacuum is in principle the easiest state to measure because it's stable basically forever. So why should this state, which is easy, be not so well described by the Poisson law? Yeah? Yes, but 2 decays to 1 even faster, and so on. So this should be worse for the higher photon number. You have?
When you have 0 atoms.
Zero photon, you mean?
0 photons. Sorry.
Yeah.
When you have 0 photons, it's easy, you know how is the atom, what is the atom state. Is it because of this?
No, it's not because of this. This should not make you overestimate the probability of having 0 photon, because okay, it's what it is. Yeah. Yes, n equal 8 is a thing, and the periodicity of measurement modulo 8 is the reason. You see that with this, the probability to have 8 is not completely negligible, and if you make an estimate, it corresponds to what you see here. Which means that the thing works even for larger photon number, and we'll discuss this eventually later. Yes? Okay, but if you have a Poisson law like this, 8 have some probability, 9 start becoming negligible. I think that the effect becomes of the order or smaller than the error bars. And of course, on 0, it's clear. On the other, it's within the precision of the measurement. Okay? Questions about this picture? So if not, let us go again to what occurs when we follow a quantum trajectory, as I already showed you before in a 4-photon case. I would like to stress that this estimation of the average photon number as a function of time, deduced from the Bayes analysis of the measurement result, allows indeed to observe many very fundamental features of quantum measurement and features predicted by quantum measurement theory. So indeed, if you look at different time scale, you see first the progressive state collapse of the field, which is prepared initially in the pure state, the coherent field state, with some uncertainties of the photon number. But it's a pure state. It is a state which have no entropy. It's fully determined by the state superposition of the coherent state. And you see that kind of fast at the time scale of this experiment, which is 0.7 seconds, you project the initial field to one state with a given photon number. And as I told you, this first measurement result is random according to the Poisson law of the initial photon number distribution. Then you have a flat steps corresponding to the fact that if you consider successive independent sample of 100 atoms, and you have like 3 independent samples of 100 atoms on this step, repeated measurement give the same measurement result. And you see here the projection postulate at work. Once you have measured, the field is still here, projected on the measurement result, which means that if you measure it again, you find again the same result. So you find it again and again until something happens. And what happens is that the cavity is not perfect. The imperfections of the mirror sometimes absorb the photon. And then the atomic detector detects a quantum jump, whose time scale is needed by the number of atoms you need to detect so that you detect a switch in the direction of the spin. Indeed, this time is slightly shorter than the time needed to have 100 independent atoms. If you have a little bit of overlap, you still detect it. So you detect this evolution as quantum jump. And quantum jump were considered as very counterintuitive quantum feature because quantum evolution is described by Schrödinger equation, which is continuous, and it was unacceptable for some physicists that continuous evolution could lead to discrete jump. But here you see that. And then, after a cascade of quantum jumps, the cavity ends up in the vacuum state with some eventually small blackbody fluctuations. But here, what you see is just the statistical noise of the measurement of the collective spin of the atom. So that's what I would like to say today concerning this realization of a quantum non-demolition meter of the photon number stored in the cavity. So I hope I convinced you that it shows you a practical way to realize experimentally a measurement which works really in a very clean way according to the fundamental postulates of quantum mechanics. And the ingredient of the measurement were that I performed a kind of indirect measurement between a quantum system to be observed, the cavity field, and a meter, a sample of atom, in our case about 100 atoms, interacting with this field, and then measured by another external meter, which destroys the atom, but gathers quantum information about the field state which remains in the cavity and which is not destroyed by the destruction of the atom. So this shows you the quantum picture I just described. And now I think I have time in the last half hour to describe you an application of this measurement apparatus for preparing deterministically and stabilizing a quantum state by quantum feedback. But maybe before going to this quantum feedback story, we can have questions if there are further questions about this projective measurement. Yes?
If you do the average of these single trajectories and photons,
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
you can increase the quality time. And can you also access with this like the new photon number?
I'm not sure I have the average curve here. Okay, here. So indeed, here is not the average, but it's the evolution, the average evolution of the probability of having 0 up to 7 photons, deduced from the experimental data, and the theory corresponds to the integration of the master equation. So if you average this over a photon number, the average photon number will follow exponential decay. So you see that not only, I'm sorry, I have not the average figure, but not only the average decays exponentially as expected, and you can fit on this data the cavity damping time, which corresponds exactly to what you measured by some independent measurement, but even individual photon number follow very well the prediction of the master equation describing field damping. Other questions? Okay, so if not, I go to the quantum feedback stuff. Okay, so I will not tell you again about the previous lecture. And now I go to the application of this measurement, which gives information about the state without destroying the state, which opens the possibility to actively modify the state depending on the measurement result. That's what we call quantum feedback. So indeed, you know, all of you, what is classical feedback, I think. It exists in many different classical systems, so some of them are depicted them. And basically, there are three basic ingredients, three basic logical elements for having a feedback loop. You have to measure the variable you want to stabilize. So you need a sensor which measures some properties of the system. And then you need to analyze the result of the measurement. And usually you use what we call a controller, which compares the measurement result with the value you want to have and estimates the distance between basically what you measure and the target and decides of an action to try to put the system closer to the target. And then once the controller decides what to do, you need some actuator which really acts on the system as a function of the measurement of the sensor and the analysis of the controller. So that's indeed something you also need in a quantum case. You need a measurement, you need to estimate the state. So it's quantum state estimation. It's a little bit more tricky than classical. And then you have to counteract, to act on the quantum system. So the very tricky thing and very different thing when you consider quantum feedback as compared to classical one is a measurement back action. When you measure a quantum system, you modify its state. And indeed, if you have in mind that you want to stabilize the system, you have some noise related to the measurement, which projects and gives random results. And so you need to find strategies allowing to stabilize the system in spite of the measurement noise, of the back action of the measurement. And it's a little bit like you want to stabilize a particle at some position, so you measure it. When you measure it, you would like to measure if it is at the right position. But if you don't find it there, then it is projected elsewhere. It looks like not a very good thing for stabilization. But indeed, we can deal with this and efficiently stabilize not the position of a particle, but the number of photons inside the cavity. So the goal, the target state in this quantum feedback experiment is a number state. So I will tell you in the next lecture how we measure or we prepare such a state and measure its Wigner function. But okay, these states are interesting. They are highly non-classical. So non-classicality often is manifested by negativities of the Wigner function. It is a fragile quantum state. It's subject to decoherence. So I will tell you more about decoherence. But if the cavity energy decays as a function of time with a time constant Tc, the decay rate of a given photon number is much faster. It's the energy damping time divided by n photon. And indeed, this fast decoherence rate of single photon state is easily understandable intuitively just by considering that if you have one photon in the cavity, you have some probability to lose it. If you have 10, in the same time window, you have 10 times more chance to lose one photon over 10 than over 1. And then the 10 photon state jumps to 9 photon much faster than the 1 photon state jumps to 0. So they are fragile states, they are subjected to high decoherence, and so their preparation is kind of challenging. You have to fight against decoherence. So they are stored in the cavity, and I'm sorry. So I don't know why. Okay, it starts again. Maybe I have to close the other window. Okay, so here is represented the principle of the quantum feedback experiment, which looks very much like the atomic clock experiment I already discussed for the Q&A experiment, so I will not describe it again, the atomic beam, the Ramsey interferometer, a source which allows one to inject a field in the cavity, and in this first version of the quantum feedback experiment, indeed the injection of a classical microwave pulse into the cavity will be the actuator, the way to actively change the state of the field in the cavity. So atomic detection is the sensor of the photon number stored in the cavity by using the quantum dot demolition method I just discussed. And then, indeed, the controller is a computer which gets the information, which is the result of the measurements, and makes the base analysis I just discussed to get some estimate of the actual number of photons present in the cavity at a given time. And indeed, this estimates the cavity state taking into account all information about the field. And I will tell you a little bit more about this later. Then it determines the optical thing to do. Basically, he estimates the fidelity of the state you can prepare by just applying some microwave pulse to the cavity field present, to the field present in the cavity, and it chooses the best value of phase and amplitude of this in order to get closer to the target state, which is a number state. So let me tell a little bit more about the actuator. So the classical source I already used to inject the initial field state in the cavity. It performs what we call a displacement of the cavity field. So to understand what is a displacement, it's useful to make a little drawing. So I already used a representation of field state in phase space by representing the Wigner function. But here I would even have a simpler representation of a field in the Fresnel plane. And so the field is a vector whose size is the amplitude of the field and whose phase is the phase of the field. So if the field is quantum, it has fluctuations. So classical fields have some shape, and other fields have different fluctuations around the average. So if you apply a microwave source to any field stored in the cavity, you will just add some vector to the field already present in the cavity. And if you have not a current field, but a field with funny fluctuation in the phase space, you just do a translation of this. So you have a new state that you know how to compute, because basically this operation with displacement operator with some amplitude alpha is a well-known unitary operator. So I don't want to go into the math there, but it's a way to change the field state in the known, in a deterministic way by just applying a microwave pulse into the cavity. And then what does the controller is to choose the phase and the amplitude, the best phase and amplitude to field to inject in the cavity after each atomic detection, which allows to the controller to estimate the photon number distribution. So numerically, to have a fast calculation and estimation of the state, we use some approximate calculation of displacement, but just a technique. And we limit also the amplitude of the displacement to make the thing more stable. So then the controller at each atomic detection will calculate the result of projection of the field state in the cavity. And let me note now that when doing this projection, indeed, the controller is not just considering the photon number distribution, but all the quantum state of the field, including coherences. If you inject coherent state, coherences between photon number may play a role. It also takes into account another knowledge I never took into account up to now in the analysis. Indeed, when the goal is to stabilize the photon number, it's better to put all your a priori knowledge about the field in the estimation of the state. Before, I did not take into account the fact that between two atoms, I know that the field decay, and I could put the decay in my description of the experiment. Indeed, I did not do that in the first analysis because I would like to have the simplest analysis, and indeed the decay was observed as a consequence of measurement results and was not put in the measurement. But not the goal is slightly different. The goal is to have the best possible preparation of the state. And then it's better to have the best possible estimate of the state to calculate the action. And the best estimate is given by using the Bayes law every time you detect one atom. But in between two detections, you have a time delay of a few hundred microseconds. You just numerically integrate the master equation describing field damping to get a more accurate description of your field. So the controller does that. He estimates field damping. Indeed, he also takes into account measurement errors, but that's a technical point. And so it takes into account detection efficiency, the fact that sometimes there are two atoms in a sample and that the information is different, detection error. And then he estimates what is the best action to take. So to decide what is the best action, you have to have a criteria to know why is a state better than another. So it means that it have to estimate the distance between the target and the actual state, and then compute the displacement, the microwave pulse, which will minimize the distance between the target and the state. So a simple distance may be just the measurement of the probability to have the target in the actual state that you can compute by taking the average value of this projection operator on the target with the estimated density operator of the field at time t. And to make a distance which is 0 when you are at the target, you take 1 minus this probability. So this fidelity is a good indicator. Only the photon number you have presently is close to the target. And the thing which is not nice with this distance is that it is 0 for any number state which is not the target. So it does not make a difference between the state which is close to the target. Let's say if we want to go to n equal 3, if you have 2 photons, the distance here will be 0, and as well it will be 0 for vacuum. So it's better to have something which is more progressive. And then, in collaboration with some mathematicians, we optimized the choice of the distance by using this definition of distance, trace of some diagonal operator with diagonal values lambda and n times the density operator. Indeed, that's a weighted sum of the photon number distribution in the actual density operator in the field of the cavity. So when you take these general formulas, then you can perform some numerical optimization of the lambda coefficients such that when you numerically simulate the experiment, the convergence is faster. So here there is a kind of tricky optimization task whose result looks like that. It amounts to some set of coefficients lambda which depends on the target. And so here you see the optimal coefficient for each target photon number from n equal 1 to 4 photons in the cavity. So basically, the lambda coefficients favors the target photon number, which have a highest weight in this probability, but also give some weight on the other photon number with a shape which is, again, numerically optimized. So that's what you take in the experiment. And now let us look how it works in a real realization of an experiment. So here I will show you a movie of the evolution as a function of time. Time scale is like 100 milliseconds, so typically of the order of the cavity damping time. Indeed, this cavity was not as good as the best one, so the cavity damping time was like 60 milliseconds instead of 130 in this experiment. So you see this time scale is a few cavity damping time. Then we start from some initial photon number distribution, which is a Poisson law. And in this experiment, I put all the a priori knowledge. So I know the photon number distribution of the initial state injected inside the cavity. And then I just look at the evolution. And first, let us look just at the free evolution of the system. So the open loop evolution of the feedback system. So basically, no feedback. So as a function of time, you see what we saw, the progressive projection of the photon number on some result. Here, the green thing, which is like 3 photons in the cavity. And then, as a function of time, you will see the spontaneous decay step by step from 3 photons to 2 photons, then to 1 photon in the cavity, so with some noise, hesitation between 2 and 3 and 1, then 1, which finally have to decay to vacuum, so this will occur right now. And then the cavity is empty. So that's the damping observed over, again, a single quantum trajectory. And now we'll see how we can counteract this damping by injecting in the cavity. So we'll see the story on this line. As a function of time, some field with amplitude alpha and a controlled phase. And indeed, to make the task of the controller numerically faster, we limit here the flexibility of the feedback to determine the amplitude of the field, and the phase is either 0 or pi. It's enough to have only 2 phases for injecting the field in the cavity. And you see in open loop, we don't inject anything. Now we'll see what does the controller do in order to stabilize the field. So this is the second story, same initial state. But now the controller have some action. Does not work. Okay, so now it's much more noisy. I can stop the thing here. So you saw that at the beginning, the things were shaking all over the thing because the initial photon number, which was Poisson, had peaks everywhere. And then the controller starts to act according to the distance we defined in order to maximize it. So initially there is big uncertainty on the photon number. Measurements results are kind of random. And then the actuator does a lot of things which looks random. And the amazing thing is that this, which looks very much like random, indeed it is very well controlled because at that time you see that you have exactly reached the target, which is the free photon field. So it's amazing because you start with a coherent state, you use a classical actuator, which is a coherent source, you just switch the phase between 0 and pi and adjust the amplitude, and this allows you to converge to a number state with no phase information, but it works. Then we continue the story, and you will see that as a function of time, where quantum jumps just destroy the target photon number, the system starts shaking, the actuator starts shaking the system until it finds back the right photon number. And then it remains stabilized for some time until the next quantum jump where the controller again restores the photon number. So that's a way to control the quantum state of the system, and we can characterize it statistically by looking more precisely at the evolution of the photon number distribution as a function of time in this system. So here, I have again the measurement result, the distance to the target, the action of the actuator, and on this colored picture, it's kind of a condensed version of the photon number distribution. The green line is the probability of the target. The red line is the probability of photon number smaller than the target. And the blue line is the probability of photon number larger than the target. And you see that, okay, there are two dominant. The target, which on average has a much higher probability as compared to doing nothing, and the main contamination and imperfection of the experiment corresponds to high probability to decay instead of going upwards, which means that if the target is not reached, most of the time you are in a smaller photon number than the target rather than in a larger photon number. And here the density operator estimated at any time, at 4 different times during the feedback operation. So initial density operator corresponding to a coherent field, and you see that we put the coherence of this operator in the initial state. Then at some point the state converge to a very pure free photon number state in the cavity, jump to 0, and then after this jump to 0, the system shaking star until we go back to here exactly 3 photons in the cavity. So we can compare the field statistics under the operation of feedback to see the quality of the feedback operation with what you have if you just take the initial coherent state and just select the realization in which you have 3 photons. So here, the probability to have 3 photons in the initial state is 22%. Then you can estimate how good is the feedback loop operation by just having the loop closed for some time, and after a given amount of feedback, you stop the feedback and continue the measurement. And you use this measurement to characterize the photon number distribution at the end of the feedback loop. So it tells you how good was your feedback if you compare it without feedback and so on. So without feedback, the measurement is the red curve, just the decay of the initial field, which sometimes finishes with 3 photons in the cavity. So the blue curve corresponds to the steady state operation of the feedback. So you see that when feedback loop is closed, you basically double the probability to have 3 photons in the state. But you have more. If you look at the signal, you know at which time you have 3 photons. So if your goal is to prepare 3 photons, it's more clever to just stop the feedback loop when you know that the field is good, instead of stopping it at a given time. So if we do this, we stop the feedback loop, and we have a criteria. We stop it when the estimation of the estimator tells you that the probability to have 3 photons is larger than 80%. But as we don't trust the estimator, we just forget about its estimation and perform independent Q&A measurement with the loop open. And the measurement result is the green bar, which gives a fidelity which is not 80%, but which is close. It's 73%. So the feedback loop is really efficient to prepare the free photon state, a very pure free photon state, in a much more efficient way than just waiting that the measurement result is a good one in a passive measurement. Indeed, you can compare, okay, so you can make this estimation for different photon number from 0 basically to 4 photons in the case of this experiment. And then you can compare the efficiency of this active measurement preparation method of a given photon number. And here you present as a function of time the fraction of realization of the experiment in which you reach the target with a fidelity larger than 80%. So if you just make passive selection, basically you prepare a field, you measure, and if it's free, the result is free, you declare it successful. If the measure is not free, you just erase the field and start again. So here, the probability of success as a function of time is the red curve, and it's kind of slow. And if you do the same, adding the feedback and select the time at which the state is the right one, then you get the green curve. So clearly, it's much more efficient to prepare a number state with feedback than without quantum feedback. Indeed, it's amazing that this feedback loop works with an action which is a very classical one, injection of a classical field. And of course, you could think about a better method that we've finally implemented historically after the first experiment I just presented. And another idea that we implemented is based on the idea of performing quantum feedback not with a classical field, but with a quantum object. And what is better quantum object for injecting a field to correct the photon number is the field emitted by a single atom. And so in the second version of the experiment, we do quantum feedback with an actuator which is different. It's not a classical source, but it's a single atom. And now the controller decides when the field state is wrong to send a resonant atom into the cavity. And the resonant atom can either absorb or emit a photon, depending whether it is prepared in the upper or the lower state of the resonant transition. And indeed, ideally, this should be much better because only one action is supposed to be enough for compensating a quantum jump. If you have a quantum jump, you need a resonant atom adding one photon. So this is expected to be faster than the classical injections, classical field injection, where you see that we had to do a lot of kind of looking random action in order to go back to the target photon number. So that's the experiment on which I will now finish. So we use the Rabi oscillation between E and G when the cavity contains one photon, and we have to encode in the controller the action on the field, the modification of the field produced by the Rabi oscillation of an atom initially in E or G. So that's the tricky part of the experiment because the experiment has some imperfection. So we cannot just put in the controller the perfect Rabi oscillation signal. And what we do is to inject in the controller the measured Rabi oscillation signal for ideally prepared pure photon number state. So it's kind of a tricky calibration experiment in which we use the quantum non-demolition measurement method to prepare a number state. And once we know that we have a given photon number, let's say here 3 photons prepared in the cavity, we send another atom which starts a Rabi oscillation. And we resume this again and again a lot of time to have the Rabi oscillation signal of resonant atom in a field containing 1 photon, 2 photon, 3 photon, 4 photon, 5 photon, and 6 photon. So these Rabi oscillation functions have different frequency, omega square root of n, so this we know a priori, but they have different contrast and damping due to experimental imperfection. And so we plug these imperfections, which are measured imperfection, into the controller, which can use this information to estimate the probability to add 1 photon if you put 1 atom at resonance in the upper state. The Rabi oscillation is not perfect, so the probability to add 1 photon will not be unity. And anyway, the time needed to add 1 photon depends on the photon number. But then the controller knows how to deal with it if it knows the photon number. So we put this information in the controller, and then the controller now have a more complicated task. In the previous version of the experiment, it just decides of the amplitude of a field it has to index, the amplitude and the phase of a field to inject. Here, he have 4 possible choice. He will choose the kind of atom he sends into the cavity. And here there are 3 kinds of atoms. He can send an atom resonant to absorb the field, so an atom prepared in the lower state of the resonant transition. He can send an atom which emits a photon to the cavity, or he can send an atom performing quantum non-demolition measurements of the experiment. So this corresponds to high degree of control of the experiment. You have to control the interaction regime. So you have to switch interaction between resonant and non-resonant. So you have to control some electric field applied between the mirror to put the atom either on resonance or out of resonance. So there's the 3 main possibilities. And as the controller is very smart, he can also change his mind at the very last time. So why is it interesting to change the mind of the controller? because basically the controller decides with some delay with respect to the measurement. Indeed, in the experiment, you have several atoms flying between the preparation zone and the detector. This distance is about 25 centimeters, and you have several atomic samples. So when the controller decides whether it's absorber or emitter, for example, one atom is there, and we use a pipe pulse here to switch the state between excited or ground state, G or E state. Of course, if the next atom detector tells you that, okay, it was not a good idea to put an absorber at that time, the controller can decide that this absorber will not be used by not setting it on resonance on the cavity. So it means that the algorithm for stabilization is kind of tricky, and indeed, the controller has the task to choose between all these possibilities. And then let me define the distance, which is slightly different in this case as compared to the injection of coherent state. So in case of coherent state, there were a very specific optimization of the distance. Here it's enough to have a distance which is much more intuitive. It's the square of the difference between average photon number and target. So this is 0 if you reach the target. And also you put in the distance the width of the photon number distribution, so that you minimize, you try with the controller to minimize not only the distance to the target, but the width. And then here is how it works. So now you have more information. You are, again, the measurement result as before. You have the distance to the target, which is initially large. Here we start with the cavity in vacuum. So we don't use a classical source at all. And then here is the sequence of action. Either send emitter atom or absorber atom, or do nothing and just measure. And then the measurement result of the result of the estimation of the state by the estimator is presented on the last graph as a function of time. And you see that very fast, the photon number starting from 0, after interaction of a series of emitters, converges to the 4 photon number state. Indeed, the convergence time was about 14 milliseconds in the case of coherent injection. Here, it drops to less than 5 milliseconds. So it's much faster, much more efficient to perform quantum feedback with a quantum actuator. Then stabilization is very good, and every time you have a quantum jump, here you see the estimator detects that there was a quantum jump to n equal 3, then it sends a few emitting atoms, and the error is corrected. Again, errors upwards are as well corrected. Here the photon number jumps to 5. The controller sends absorbers and recovers the target state. So again, we can characterize statistically the performance of the feedback loop by characterizing the field prepared at some various time. So here is indeed a resume of the performance for different target states, ranging from 1 to 7 photons in the cavity. The other axis is the actual photon number distribution if you take this target. And here, the reference is the Poisson distribution centered on the target state. So what you could have if you just have a classical way to prepare the thing. So under the operation of feedback loop, in steady state, you see very peaked distribution around the target state, and they are more peaked than in the case of the classical actuator. If you perform post-selection by again stopping the feedback loop when you estimate you are very close to the target, and check with independent measurement, you get high purity preparation of number state up to 7 photons inside the cavity. So this feedback loop experiment works indeed very well. And I think I will stop here for today. And I hope we still have a little bit of time for questions, if you have. So, yes.
When you define the distance, that's not the fidelity that you.
Yeah.
That lambda matrix.
Yes.
Depends on the number of photons, or it's constant.
It's
Or is something you define defined once and it's
Okay, I defined it once given a target. So it's not the same distance if it's not the same target. But then I don't change it during the evolution of the loop. It's a fixed distance.
if you want to change target, you have to define that method.
So if you change target, you change the distance. But we made an experiment in which we change target in real time, and you see that it follows. But then the controller just take the right distance corresponding to the right target.
Okay, so that metric depends on the state target, but not like just the row, not just the density matrix, but some dimension.
The target is a pure state, and the distance is defined by the choice of this pure state only. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michel. And so coffee, and then at the same place, actually, a poster session now.